Rain poured without pause, turning the streets of Port Angeles into trembling mirrors. The sky hung low, the kind of gray that seemed permanent. Under the torn awning of Miller's convenience store sat 11-year-old Marcus Chun, his wheelchair angled so the water would slide off the cracked vinyl seat instead of pooling beneath him. The sound of the rain was constant, a dense whisper against metal and asphalt. Every few seconds, a drop slipped through a tear in the awning and splashed against his sleeve, marking time. His fingers were cramped around $5 damp. He had kept them closed since morning when his mother had pressed the bills into his hand before leaving for her first shift. Her nails were short and raw from bleach. Her voice had been steady, but her eyes hadn't met his. $5, she said, for lunch this week. He had nodded because what else could you do when the math never worked, but you had to make it work anyway. Now the bills stuck together, soft at the corners, the ink beginning to blur. The hunger in his stomach felt alive, pulsing behind his ribs. It had been there for 2 years, since the accident, since his father's absence and his mother's endless work. He had learned to live beside it. The rain, the hunger, the noise of tires on wet pavement. They had become a kind of background hum. Inside the store, fluorescent lights flickered, pale and harsh. A bored cashier leaned on the counter. Marcus watched the reflections through the window but could not make himself move. He had left school before lunch, rolled himself down the street. Instead of sitting in the cafeteria, pretending he didn't hear the laughter or the whispers, he could not face the tables where nobody wanted to sit beside him, the glances that slid away, the pity that stuck like gum to the bottom of every kindness. He wanted only to eat alone, maybe on the back curb, maybe where the noise of the rain could drown out everything else. But now, sitting here, even that seemed like too much effort. His hands ached from pushing the chair against the wind. The rain smelled like metal and exhaust. He was staring at the stream running toward the gutter when movement in the alley caught his eye. A shape unfolded from the darkness, tall, broad, and unmistakably out of place in this quiet stretch of neighborhood. The man who stepped into the light looked like he had been carved from another world. His leather vest was soaked, his jeans heavy with water, tattoos covered his arms, his beard, streaked with gray, clung to his jaw. Across the back of his vest, barely visible through the wet shine, Marcus saw the winged skull he had only seen in movies and news segments, the symbol of the Hell's Angels. Instinct tightened Marcus's shoulders. He had seen enough adults flinch at that patch to understand what it meant. Danger, trouble, stay clear. Yet the man didn't move like danger. He moved like someone carrying exhaustion in every joint. His hands shook slightly. His breath misted the air in uneven bursts. For a moment the man looked toward the store, then away, as if debating whether to go inside. When his eyes lifted and met Marcus's, the boy froze. The gaze that landed on him was not what he expected. The man's eyes were hazel, clear, and startlingly kind. Not pitying, not assessing, just seeing. Marcus noticed how his lips trembled from the cold, how his clothes clung to him like armor that no longer protected. The realization came simple and sharp. This man needed help. Marcus had $5. It was all he had, but it was something. His throat tightened. The words came out before he could think. "Excuse me, sir." The rain caught half his voice and carried it away. But the man turned. Marcus swallowed. "Are you hungry?" The man's eyebrows lifted. He hesitated, then stepped closer, slow and cautious. Up close, he seemed even larger, the leather stretching across his shoulders, rain dripping from the end of his hair. When he stopped under the awning, the storm softened to a background hiss. He crouched until his face was level with Marcus's, water pooling beneath his boots. "I'm all right, kid," he said, His voice was deep, rough, but it carried a strange gentleness. "You don't need to worry about me." Marcus shook his head. "You're shivering," he said. His speech carried the faint slur he hated, but he pressed on. "You look hungry. I have $5. It's enough for coffee, maybe a sandwich." The man's gaze moved from Marcus's hand to his face. For a second he didn't speak. When he did, the words came quiet. "Careful. That's your lunch money, isn't it?" Marcus nodded. "I'm not that hungry anyway." It was a lie. His stomach ached in protest, but he kept his chin steady. The man studied him a long time. Rain slid down his temples. His expression changed slowly, the way light shifts when a cloud breaks. "I can't take your lunch money, son. Your mom worked hard for that." "She did," Marcus said. His fingers closed tighter on the bills. "But right now you need it more." Something in the man's face cracked, barely visible. A fissure behind the eyes. He reached out, hesitated, then accepted the money. His palm was cold and rough. Marcus felt the texture of old scars, the kind that tell more truth than words ever could. "What's your name?" "Kid," the man asked. "Marcus. Marcus Chun." The man nodded once. "People call me Axe," he said. "Marcus, I want you to know something. What you just did, giving what you have when you don't have much, that's rare. Don't let anyone tell you different." The praise hit Marcus like warmth after a long chill. His throat burned. "Will you be okay?" he asked. "Do you have somewhere to go?" Axa straightened, still holding the $5. "I'll figure it out," he said. "Always do. You get yourself home, kid." He started toward the door, then paused. "And thank you, I mean that." Marcus watched him push through the glass doors. The sensor gave a tired beep. Inside, Axe spoke to the cashier, pointed at the coffee machine. Marcus could see him through the window, a large man in a puddle of fluorescent light, wrapping both hands around a paper cup. He took a slow drink, the kind that looks like relief. Then he picked up a sandwich, unwrapped it carefully, and ate in deliberate bites. Outside, the rain softened to drizzle. Marcus kept watching. When Axe turned to leave, he caught Marcus's gaze through the window. He lifted the cup in a small salute. The gesture was simple, almost formal, yet it struck with the weight of acknowledgement, a quiet thank you from one person who had nothing to another who had almost nothing. Marcus managed a smile. His throat felt too tight to speak. Axe disappeared into the gray curtain of rain, his shape melting into the alley's blur until only the echo of footsteps remained. For a while Marcus sat still, listening to the rhythm of drops against metal. The city hummed around him. Cars moved, tires hissing over water. A distant siren rose and fell. He was soaked, cold, and hungrier than before. Yet a warmth began spreading from somewhere that had nothing to do with temperature. He thought about how his teacher had doubted him this morning, how classmates had laughed when he stuttered over a word, how easy it was for people to treat him as if he were half-finished. But Axe hadn't done that. Axe had looked straight at him and seen a person, not a project. The ache in Marcus's stomach quieted under the heavier beat of pride, not arrogance, just the quiet knowledge that he had chosen right. He had seen need and answered it. That mattered. He pushed the wheels, leaving the shelter of the awning. Rain pattered against his knees, but the cold felt less cruel now. The street was a sheet of silver. His tires hissed as they rolled through puddles. A woman passed under an umbrella, offered a brief smile, then hurried on. Marcus felt, for once, visible in a way that did not sting. At the corner he stopped for the traffic light. The puddles around the curb rippled with drops. When the signal changed, he crossed slowly, his hands sure on the rims. Water streaked down his jacket. Each push forward made a soft, rhythmic squeak. Sycamore Avenue smelled of wet cedar and detergent from the laundromat. He passed the windows of apartments, squares of yellow light flickering inside. The city felt both enormous and small enough to hold. By the time he reached his building, the rain had thinned to mist. He waited in the entry, watching the reflections on the wet pavement. In the glass door he could see his own face, pale, hair damp, eyes tired but alive. Behind that reflection, across the street, the sign of Miller's glowed faintly red. He imagined Axe somewhere on another block, sipping the last of his coffee. The $5 bill already turned into warmth and food. Maybe he was sitting under another awning. Maybe he had found his bike again. Maybe he was thinking about the kid in the wheelchair who hadn't looked away. Marcus didn't know. What he did know was simpler. Sometimes you give what you can, and it becomes something bigger than you meant. He exhaled, slow and full, and let the night air fill his lungs with the scent of rain and asphalt. Hunger would come again tomorrow. So would the stares at school, but so would the memory of that moment. Two strangers in the rain. A handshake made of courage. He rolled forward, wheels humming against the tile, and whispered to no one, "Worth it." Outside, the clouds were beginning to thin, a pale line of sky showing through. Somewhere beyond it, stars waited their turn. Marcus didn't need to see them yet. It was enough to know they were there. Morning opened like a clear blade across the sky, rinsing the town of its night grief. The storm had done its work and moved on, leaving Port Angeles washed and raw, cedar bright, and sidewalks dark with moisture. In the small kitchen of the apartment, Rosa hummed under her breath while steam rose from the kettle. Her scrubs held the heat of the dryer. Her hair was pinned for speed rather than style, and the tiredness around her eyes looked lighter, as if the light itself had untied one knot. Marcus woke to that sound and to the thin gold spill around the edges of the blind. The air tasted like metal and ocean, and his chest felt loose in a way it did not. Most mornings, Rosa checked the break of his chair with the toe of her shoe and kissed his forehead once. The kind of kiss that says, "We are moving, and we are moving together." She helped him layer a sweatshirt beneath his jacket and tugged the zipper through its sticky place with the gentle authority of someone who refuses to let small things become large. Breakfast was a banana and toast, cut into careful squares. He ate all of it. The hunger inside him still spoke, but it no longer shouted, and the quiet of that change gave the morning a different shape. He told her what had happened the day before, as plainly as a weather report. A man in a leather vest in the rain, kind eyes, coffee and a sandwich and a salute. He did not place himself at the center of the story. Only within it, Rosa stood with her hands under running water, thinking. He watched her weigh fear and pride, the invisible scale tipping from one side to the other. She turned off the tap, dried her hands on the towel, and bent to rest her forehead against his hair. "You gave your lunch money," she said, and he said he did, because the truth was the shortest path through. "I have a little extra this week," she said, and when his mouth opened for the reflex of protest, she lifted an eyebrow that ended the debate. She slid a folded bill into the inside pocket of his jacket and tapped twice on the fabric like a gavel. "Eat at school, please." He nodded, not because he was perfectly obedient, but because he trusted the rhythm they had built for surviving a long season. They left at the usual time, because ritual steadies the legs, even when the world does not. The elevator still wore its modest sign of apology and failure, and so Rosa rolled him down the ramp to the street. The morning bit their cheeks with clean cold. Sycamore Avenue shone. At first the block looked ordinary, a wet Tuesday stitched with drip lines and pale sun. Then their corner of the world turned and reassembled in front of them. Chrome caught the first hard light and threw thin ribbons of it up into the trees. A low chorus of engines idled in patient conversation as they rounded the corner. The sight resolved the way a photograph develops in a tray. Both curbs were lined with motorcycles, row upon row. steel gleaming like mirrors and bone. Leather vests and jackets patterned the sidewalks. Patches flashed reds and blacks and golds. Some riders leaned on saddles. Some stood with hands at belts. Some held helmets tucked to ribs. Their attention pointed down the street toward the Chun building with the alert courtesy of people trained to make room when room is needed. Rosa stopped so fast that the chair brushed the backs of her calves. One hand pressed to his shoulder without thinking. Her body went quiet in the particular way of a nurse who has walked into a room that could be danger and could be blessing and must be known before it is either. What on earth? She breathed, and even the breath sounded careful. Neighbors stood on porch steps, caught between fear and astonishment. A woman clutched a sleeve to her chest like a small animal. Two kids in pajamas flattened their noses to a window. Phones appeared but did not swarm. It felt less like a spectacle and more like an arrival. The crowd shifted. Riders separated into two even banks as if pulled by a tide, leaving a clean corridor of daylight down the center of the street. The movement had the natural timing of habit. Through that corridor came Axe. Dry leather. The same vest soaked yesterday now sat on him like a standard, not armor. The beard caught new sun. He walked with a steadiness that said the weather was over and the purpose had begun. He stopped in front of them. The rumble of engines settled into a low purr of background. He did not raise his voice, yet every ear heard it. "Marcus Chun," he said, "yesterday you showed me kindness when you had no reason to wish. You gave without asking for anything back. You saw a person who needed help, and you helped." Marcus did not know where to look. The old habit would have been down, but there was no pity in the attention, and so there was no shame to hide from. He looked at Axe's eyes. There was a softness at the corners that had nothing to do with weakness. There was acknowledgement in it, and that word felt heavier than praise. Axe turned a shoulder, and Marcus saw the number of them more clearly. Not a handful, not a few dozen, many, from this city, and from roads that combed the region. Their insignia both familiar and strange. They stood with the posture of witness rather than spectacle, and that difference smoothed the fear that kept trying to rise in his throat. "When I told my brothers and sisters about you," Axe said, "about an 11-year-old who gave his lunch money to a stranger with a reputation that scares most people, something happened. Every single one wanted to answer that with their own." Footsteps carried forward with calm weight. Gifts came not in a rush, but in a measured river. Paper bags with grocery cards clipped to handles. Boxes of books with constellations on their spines. A jacket folded to the shape of a small body. A laptop wrapped in brown paper tied with string in a tidy cross. The street smelled like coffee and cold steel and laundry soap. The light struck the chrome and scattered coins of brightness up the brick of the buildings. Marcus looked up at his mother. Rosa rarely cried where anyone could see. Tears now made clean tracks down her face. Not messy, simply true. A woman with a braid of silver through dark hair stepped forward with the purposeful calm of authority. Her vest bore the skull and wings, and above it a red rocker with a single word that meant leadership, not in theory but in practice. "Mrs. Chun," she said, her tone professional and warm, the hard blend of hospital and home. "We know you work 3 jobs to keep this family standing. We would like to cover your rent and utilities for 3 months. This is not charity. This is gratitude." She held out an envelope. It was thick, a cream color that felt official rather than fancy, sealed and stamped on the back with a small square of red ink. The stamp was clean and precise, and it said paid 3 months in a font that summoned city counters and tidy ledgers. Beneath the words was a time, 9:12. Rosa took the envelope with both hands as if it were hot because it was heavy with relief. "Thank you." Rosa managed, the words barely a breath. The woman smiled, a quick light across a composed face. "I am Valkyrie," she said. "You are doing a good job. Mother, do not let anyone tell you different." Phones were held not like shields but like notebooks. A man in a blue hoodie kept a clipboard and wrote names and times and items with clear script. Each box and bag was matched to a signature, procedure threaded through leather and patchwork like a quiet spine. Marcus felt a part of his own mind latch onto that order. He remembered marks. They were proof. He could follow them forward. Axe crouched, bringing the day down to eye level again. "How are you holding up, kid?" he asked, voice pitched for one person in a crowd. "Overwhelmed," Marcus said, confused. Axe nodded. "That is honest. This is a lot. It is for you, not at you. That matters." He held out his hand, and Marcus met it. The handshake was firm and brief, and the same type of handshake Axe gave to Valkyrie, and to the medic, and to the quiet man who wheeled a cart. No difference for age or chair or power. Marcus noted it and filed it as another small proof that something inside the world could be correct. Riders came up in twos and threes. A woman with a faded rose tattoo handed over a sealed pouch with a pharmacy card inside. A man with arms like railroad ties placed a stack of notebooks on Marcus's lap and perched a set of fine point pens on top, as if crowning something fragile. A grocery card found Rosa's fingers and stayed there. Names were exchanged, road names and given names. Every greeting landed at his face rather than above his head toward his mother. He was treated not like an emblem but like a person. Across the street, someone lifted a camera with an orange foam windscreen. The red tally light winked on, then held. The operator kept to the edge of the corridor. The riders did not stiffen. They widened the space by half a foot without being asked. Give them the view, not the voice. Let the voice belong here. The envelope kept catching light. Rosa tucked it under her arm to keep her hands free for the physical choreography of gratitude. Each time she moved, the red stamp flashed, and the small line of letters, mean and steady, showed again. Paid 3 months. 9/12. Marcus's brain held that time and sealed it to the morning. He felt the significance settle into him, the way a star map bends a traveler's path by a degree that becomes a mile. Axe lowered his voice even more. "Listen," he said, "you did not give me $5 yesterday. You gave me dignity. You reminded a lot of people why they believe in the code they say they live by. This," he said, sweeping a palm across the metal and leather and sun, "this is what happens when respect calls and respect answers." "I do not understand why it is so much," Marcus said. "Because kindness is contagious when people are paying attention," Axe said. "Yesterday, you made them pay attention." Rosa squeezed Marcus's shoulder, the pressure of her hand reaching through layers of cloth and fatigue and finding the steadiness beneath. A neighbor lifted 2 fingers from a porch railing in a salute that was his own and still belonged to the day. No sirens, no orders, just the rumble of engines like a choir at low volume and the murmuring of strangers choosing to act like family for a morning. By the time the first wave of gifts had been placed and logged and passed into waiting arms, the line had not shrunk. It had reorganized itself. The young man with the cart rolled forward with a long box strapped neatly with fabric bands. "Hold that," Axe said with a grin that made him look suddenly younger. Later, Rosa finally laughed, a ragged, surprised sound that broke a last small wall. "What are we going to do with all this?" she whispered. "We will figure it out," Marcus said, and he believed it in a way he could feel behind his ribs. The cold loosened. Someone began handing around paper cups of coffee to whoever had empty hands. The smell lifted into the air between leather and chrome. The sun climbed another inch. The street looked like itself, and also like a threshold Marcus did not want to blink in case blinking changed something. It did not. The image held. He felt the tilt of a future, not an earthquake, not a siren, only the clean click of a compass needle aligning. He knew starlight took years to reach an eye. He knew a small change now could become a great distance later. He had not expected to feel that geometry on his own street in daylight, with engines humming like a promise. X, he said, finding the courage to attach the name to his gratitude. Thank you. Axe nodded and blinked, not hiding the moisture that gathered. He turned to the work of the next wave, and the morning continued to unroll itself with grace and order, a long ribbon of gifts and names and signatures and eye contact, and the red stamp flashing in small suns under the wide blue sky. By nightfall, Axe would brief nearly 1,000 riders about the boy. The morning did not dim so much as find its truer color. What had first arrived as glare and shock settled into a steadier brightness, as if the street discovered it could hold this much attention without cracking. The corridor down the center stayed clear, riders adjusted by half steps and tilted shoulders, the easy choreography of people who understand lanes and how to make them. Rosa's hand remained on Marcus's shoulder, her breath evening out until he felt each calm inhale through the jacket on his back, the way he sometimes felt the city through the chair's wheels. Gifts came like a procession rather than a pile. A woman with careful letters tattooed across her knuckles handed Rosa a grocery card in a soft sleeve and said, "For when the fridge argues." A tall man with a sunburned neck set a pantry box into a neighbor's arms, and the neighbor held it like a borrowed infant and asked where to place it. Someone pointed with 2 fingers toward a folding table that had appeared as if the street had grown it. The man with the clipboard noted each handoff with time and initials steady as a heartbeat. Marcus watched the pen leave a trail of ink and felt an odd knot loosen. He did not know why the sight of record calmed him, only that it did. At the edges, phones watched with a patience that did not feel greedy. A camera with an orange windscreen hovered near a mailbox. Another lens blinked from across the intersection, the operator testing focus with 2 fingertip turns. No one shouted. Microphones hung like small, quiet birds. News usually came to this neighborhood when something was broken. Today, the equipment stood ready for a thing working as it should. Marcus glanced toward Axe to see if the watchfulness bothered him. Axe was busy, and busy in a way that read as confidence rather than strain. That felt like permission. A young rider peeled away with a rolling cart. His hair was tied back, his jaw still soft beneath a neat beard. On the cart, a long cardboard box sat strapped with fabric bands, the kind of secure that says, "This is not just a parcel, this is an intention." He pushed it the way a person pushes a sleeping thing. He stopped before Marcus and set the brake with his boot. He looked to Axe not for show but for the signal. Axe's mouth bent at one corner, the kind of quiet smile that warms the air without stealing it. "Now," he said. The rider slipped the bands and lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in thin foam, lay a matte black tube, a tripod folded tight as a resting animal, and a small case of lenses with domed caps that caught the sun in tiny coins. Every small muscle in Marcus's back pulled tight. Breath paused. The rider gripped the tube, as if lifting a story he meant to tell right, and set it gently across Marcus's lap. The weight surprised him. It did not feel like a toy that fogs at the first breath. It felt like an instrument, like a promise shaped from metal and care. The rider crouched and met his eyes. "I am Cisco," he said. "Axe said you love the stars. We thought you should be able to see them." Marcus set his fingers against the cool curve. The metal was smoother than it looked, like river stone that had been held by water for a long time. Words in his throat lined up and failed. He found one that fit and let it go. "Thank you." Relief crossed Cisco's face, quick and bright, the relief of getting a fragile thing to land on its feet. "There are 3 lenses in the case," he said, tapping the little box. "We labeled which is which. Start wide, then go narrow." He gestured toward the tripod. "It is sturdy. We tuned the azimuth so it tracks smooth." Then the air shifted. The low murmur of engines rose in tone, bright, in a way that meant a new element had joined the scene. A white van edged into view at the end of the block and stopped rather than intruding. The station logo shone on the door. 2 people stepped out with the practiced grace of people who know how to move cables without tripping anyone. The shoulder rig swung into place. The anchor carried only a small microphone. The lens flare kissed the corner of the long box and sparked off. A red tally light blinked alive. In the viewfinder, the word "live" glowed, and a digital clock marked a moment that Marcus's mind photographed without instructions. He would later translate the numbers in his head as live at 9:58. He did not need to see the figures to understand that something private had become public. Valkyrie, who had been coordinating a neat stack of wrapped packages, gave the camera a look that drew a boundary. You could not see, but everyone felt. The operator read the look like a road sign and obeyed. The anchor shifted her angle so that the shot did not reduce Marcus and Rosa and Axe to background. Her introduction was brief. Sometimes the news remembered its manners. Riders approached with smaller gifts that would grow larger later. A set of art supplies wrapped in tissue with a clip note that said, "For when your hands need to make sense of something," a stack of heavy socks, a thermos that did not leak. Each item passed into careful custody with a line of ink to follow it wherever it went. The morning smelled like paper and coffee, and a little like laundry day. It felt like the first day of a school a person actually wanted to attend. Marcus could not stop looking at the telescope. He saw his face bend in the gloss of the barrel, mouth slightly open as if a word had gotten lost and might return if he kept very still. He reached for the lens case. His fingers shook, and the gentle tap of the plastic caps sounded loud to him. Cisco anchored the box with a palm and did not say a thing about the tremor. "Tenderness does not need a name to be real. Let us mount it," Cisco said. "We can fit your balcony later, but we can balance it now." Axe nodded at the riders behind them, and space widened by a step to make a little workshop. The tripod legs unfolded with a snapping rhythm. Cisco locked them. He lifted the tube, and with Marcus's help settled it into the ring. The clamp tightened with 3 patient turns, the kind of motion that teaches a body to trust. He slid the finder scope into its bracket with a small click. He moved through each action calmly, naming steps in the soft voice of a mechanic teaching a careful student. Marcus leaned forward until he could smell a faint trace of oil under new paint. He looked through the empty focuser and saw a thin circle of morning. He closed his left eye, then his right, trying to find which would become his seeing eye, the way some boys once tested which eye would aim a sling. The thought that this instrument would live with him, and not in a catalog, settled under his ribs with a quiet thud. Axe waited until Cisco tightened the last screw, then crouched again. "You good, kid?" he asked. Marcus nodded, then reached for a better word. "This is real," he said. "Very," Axe answered, and his mouth bent again. The live camera stayed back, taking the wider picture. A second camera appeared in the window, across the street, not on a shoulder, but in a neighbor's hand, a phone in a cracked case. The neighbor recorded from the second floor the way families record from across a yard. In a few minutes, that clip would travel through 1,000 thumbs and land in 1,000 rooms. An app would stamp a time in the corner, and people would say, "Post at 10:03." Marcus did not know that yet. He only felt the small hum under the day grow a notch. The hum of attention gathering itself. The anchor stepped to the line, asked Rosa if she could offer a sentence. Rosa shook. No, then yes, then no again, then smiled apology. The anchor nodded and stepped back. A station hand offered paper cups by tilting rather than insisting. Axe took one and passed one to Rosa, and the exchange was so ordinary in the middle of the improbable that Marcus almost laughed. The strangest morning of his life made room for coffee like any other morning. The clipboard man turned a page, he checked totals against a rough list, and stamped a corner with a handheld dater. The soft thunk landed like a period at the end of a clear sentence. The sharp scent of ink lifted and faded. Marcus added it to his stack of sensory evidence, as if he were building an archive in his head. You want to try the focus? Cisco asked, already knowing. Marcus nodded. Cisco placed the smallest lens in his palm. It had more weight than its size promised. Marcus turned the knurled ring and felt each fine thread walk into place. He slid the lens into the diagonal, with the care of returning a jewel to its setting. It seated with a quiet click. He leaned and peered. There was nothing to see but blue and the shadow of a streetlight. It did not matter. The sight line touched his eye, and the rest of the city dimmed. Across the street, a little girl lifted her hand and called, "Is that a space thing?" "Yes," Marcus said, and the word gave him a small charge, as if a wire had connected him to her and then to something beyond both of them. Her mother hushed with a smile that said, "No harm done." The girl looked at him as if looking at a wizard. Marcus lowered his face to the eyepiece again and smiled in secret. Axe turned, so the bigger camera could not take either face without leave. He became a wall, where a wall helped, and a window, where a window was better. A rider leaned in to speak to him, and he adjusted the flow with a nod. At the top of the block, a grocery truck needed the lane, and the corridor widened so the truck could pass without grinding or retreat. The driver lifted a hand, riders returned the gesture, and the city kept breathing. Marcus's mind began sorting the morning into bins: idle engines, clean leather, lens metal against skin. Coffee he could not swallow because his mouth had gone dry. A bird shook water off a wire. A dog barked once, and decided this was above his pay grade. The sun climbed and warmed the tube under his fingers by a degree he could feel. He looked to Rosa. Her face was quiet now. The envelope rode under her arm like a temporary wing. The red stamp showed on the back flap, neat and exact, paid 3 months, and beneath it, the time that his mind spoke to itself as 9/12. He leaned a little, as if closeness could make a number more permanent. He did not know why the time felt like a nail driven into the morning to hang memory on, only that it did. The neighbor's phone chimed the small sound of a clip sent on its way. The camera's red light held. The anchor mouthed a cue, and then let the scene speak for itself. A rider with a medic patch handed Valkyrie a stack of forms. She split the stack and passed one to the clipboard man. A quick U sign and I sign exchange. The dater thunked again, a little sharper this time. The sound carried far enough to be noticed and not far enough to interrupt. Marcus wiped his palm on his jeans and smoothed the barrel, as if promising the instrument he would not treat it carelessly. A flicker at the corner of his vision drew him up. A freelancer with a long lens had gone to one knee across the lane. He did not step into the corridor. He lifted the camera only after he asked with his eyes, and Marcus nodded once. He did not point the glass at faces. He turned the focus ring with the tiny patience of someone pulling a thread from a woven blanket and aimed at the back of the envelope under Rosa's arm. The frame filled with the red square. The letters were crisp. The small line that said paid 3 months sat like a seal beneath. The time, nestling under the words, clicked into clarity. 9:12. The shutter ticked. One frame. Then another. The man leaned back and checked the display, not to worship the shot, but to confirm that the proof had been captured. Through the long glass, it looked like a sign painted on the side of a barn. In truth, it was no bigger than a stamp, but the lens made the tiny the size of a truth anyone could see. Marcus watched the barrel breathe. As the aperture narrowed for sharpness, he felt his own lungs copy the movement. He let the air go, and the day locked into place the way a tripod leg clicks when it finds the right notch. The lens kept moving closer, until the stamp and the minute beneath it became the whole world. A red square of certainty at the center of leather and chrome and morning light. The red stamp stayed in Marcus's mind, even as the street loosened and the noise thinned. The square of ink had fixed itself like a nail in a beam, steady and sure. Proof that the morning had happened exactly the way it felt. Riders finished logging the last boxes. Engines coughed awake in courteous waves. Rose's hand on his shoulder no longer shook. She slid the envelope deeper beneath her arm and smoothed the flap with her thumb, as if flattening a wrinkle across time. By late morning, the block had returned to being a street and not a gathering. A few riders stayed to carry things upstairs, to tape a neat list inside the cupboard so nothing would be buried and forgotten. Axe moved without hurry, a hand on a shoulder here, a quiet word there, never asking the moment to look at him, and never hiding inside it either. When the timing felt natural, he crouched once more by the chair and tapped the telescope's tube with the back of his fingers, the way a person touches a sleeping animal before they leave the room. "Call if the mount fights you," he said. Marcus nodded. He could hear the shape of later inside that promise. The phone in Rose's pocket buzzed. She glanced at the screen as if it might bite. The call was polite. The words local and morning and respectful. She looked to Marcus. He said yes with a nod, because a nod was the right size for the day. They were at the studio by early afternoon. The hall smelled of warm dust and floor wax. A poster with a weather map curled at one corner and had been tacked down with a strip of old tape. The sofa in the lobby wore a careful mended seam. A producer met them at the door with the practiced grace of someone who knows how to slow down near a family. "We only ask what you want to say," she told him. "If you wish to say nothing, we respect that." Marcus felt the truth of that tone and said he would speak. The set lights were soft and cool, meant to make people look like themselves and not like versions of themselves for sale. The floor manager asked if he wanted a studio chair or the one he brought. "Mine," Marcus said. "Good answer," the manager said, and showed him the ramp with a little flourish, as if it were a stage entrance. Behind glass, the small room of screens blinked and steadied. A voice above the door called 30 seconds in a calm that helped more than anyone could know. The anchor slid a stack of cards under the desk so she would not look down out of habit. She smiled one way toward the camera and then a truer way toward him, while the theme music played quietly enough for the two of them to hear each other breathe. "I will not ask you to relive yesterday," she said softly. "I will ask what you want people to understand about what happened next." The red light on the camera clicked on. Marcus felt his pulse thud once and then gather itself. He loosened his hands on the rims so he would not clench. He smelled the faint heat of the lamps and the sweet cream ghost of coffee left somewhere just offset. "You left school because you needed quiet," the anchor said. "You saw a man in need. You helped him. People are calling you inspiring. How do you feel about that word?" Marcus looked past the lens, into the little room, where people arranged a broadcast like a careful meal. He pulled air to the bottom of his lungs. He did not sand his words smooth. He let them stand as they were. "I am not an inspiration," he said. "I am a person." The anchor did not flinch. "Say more," she said. "I gave $5 to a hungry man because he was hungry and I could help." Marcus said, "If that is inspiring, then we have lowered the bar for being human." Rosa's hand touched the back of his chair where the frame met the handle. He felt her steadiness and kept going. "My disability is not a moral achievement," he said. "It is a fact about my body. Kindness is not a miracle when a disabled person does it. It is normal. It should be normal for everyone." Behind the glass, a woman lifted a thumb from behind a monitor and set it down again, the way a person agrees without breaking a moment. The anchor nodded, not as a brand but as a person. "There is another way this story is being told," the anchor said, glancing toward the edge of the set where Axe stood out of frame. "It is also being told as a story about a community many people fear. It can be both." Marcus said, "It can be true that there are reasons some people are afraid of those patches. It can also be true that yesterday those people were family to me. Both can be true at once. You balance well." The anchor said, "I use a chair," Marcus answered, and the room smiled in that small, human way that lets a hard subject breathe. A producer stepped out of the control room and placed a clear plastic case on the desk. "We will give you a copy of the segment on this card," she said, "and we will also send a link." The white label read, "Segment Backup" in tidy handwriting, and beneath the words, a time written out in careful letters, a time that sounded in Marcus's mind as 12:17. He liked the firmness of it. He trusted things that could be filed and found again. Memory could be argued with, metadata could not. The anchor asked one last question. "What do you hope people do after they hear you?" "See people before you see symbols," Marcus said. "See the person before you see the chair or the patch or the rumor. If you cannot do that yet, slow down until you can try." The red light dimmed. The room exhaled. The anchor squeezed his hand. "Thank you for saying it here," she said. He nodded because nodding is a language that works where speech can tangle. Outside, the air was sharper. Puddles held a washed sky. Rosa set the case in her bag as gently as if it were a living thing. Back on Sycamore, the apartment smelled like cardboard and coffee and the beginning of something. The tripod leaned by the balcony door like a folded animal waiting to stretch. The long box nested near the couch. Rosa's phone lit with a short clip someone had already posted from the window across the street. It started on the red stamp, held there for a breath over the words "paid 3 months." And the little app mark told the world the moment had been shared a few minutes after 10, though the numbers on the screen had become letters. When Marcus read them in his head, the caption carried a banner phrase, the words, #KindnessCrew, written out like a hand-painted sign. He did not love labels, did not hate this one. He let it exist without asking it to define the day. A message arrived from the head librarian. She wrote that the city would meet to change the policy that kept people without identification from using computers, that a sponsor system could bridge the gap, that the morning on Sycamore had been cited as example and not as spectacle. She promised to send minutes. Marcus read the note twice. A small band of tightness eased between his shoulder blades. Axe knocked later, and let himself in only when Rosa called "come in." He washed his hands at the sink first, a small courtesy that said "I belong and I do not assume." He looked at the telescope, at the envelope on the table, and then at Marcus, the way a person checks a compass and finds the needle where it should be. "You did good on camera," he said. "I told the truth," Marcus said. "Harder than it sounds," Axe answered. They set the tripod on the balcony. As daylight thinned toward gold, the city hushed in that way between afternoon and evening, when the light asks the noise to step back. Axe adjusted the legs until the eyepiece met Marcus without strain. They practiced the slow sweep of altitude and the smooth patience of azimuth. Rosa stood in the doorway with a mug and the kind of smile that files itself where it can be found later. As the first faint stars woke, Marcus turned his words over in his mind to see if any bent in the wrong place. They held. He found a bright point and nudged the tube until a banded sphere resolved, pale and sure. With its small companions beaded beside it, wonder moved through him without needing permission. The world below had been loud. The sky above was quiet. The telescope made both true in the same breath. Inside, the television cycled through posts and clips. The red stamp image had already been nestled into collections and playlists and threads. It did not feel stolen. It felt caught in a net made to keep a moment from sinking. On the shelf by the door, the clear case waited with the black card inside, the label steady as a heartbeat, the time written as letters. On the table, the envelope lay with the red square facing up. Those two objects anchored the flood of talking to the floor. Marcus eased back from the eyepiece, shoulders aching in the honest way that comes from holding still and paying attention. He was hungry and tired and clean with the kind of fatigue that means a day has meant something. Axe watched the dark rise and said, "You know, some people will be mad about what you said." Marcus nodded. "Probably," he said. "Good," Axe said quietly. He tipped the tube a fraction to center the planet again. The little moon steadied like beads on a string. He did not need the whole world to agree. He needed the few who would carry the truth carefully. He looked once at the envelope and once at the clear case, then back through the glass to the calm, bright thing holding its place. "Thank you," he said into the room. "You are welcome." Rosa and Axe answered together, and the day let go of him with a gentleness that felt exactly like permission to rest. The next afternoon carried the honest chill of a town rinsed clean. School moved in its usual slow crawl, all fluorescent hum and chair legs whispering, but the weight in Marcus felt different now, less like a stone and more like a small anchor that kept him steady. When the last bell released the building's breath, he rolled to the public library, the one place that could turn noise into air. The entry smelled of paper warmed by heaters and the faint wool of winter coats. Somewhere behind the stacks, a radiator clicked, like a metronome set to calm. Miss Patterson stood at the desk with a cart of new arrivals, glasses low enough to let kindness show above the frames. She looked up and brightened in a way that did not make a fuss. "Good afternoon, Marcus." "Hi, Miss Patterson. Computer today." "Yes, please." She checked the sign-in sheet with the neatness that made people trust her. The slim printer on her elbow chirped, pushed out a thin slip, and went key it. She tore the heat paper and slid it to him with a smile. The tiny letters along the corner carried the library clock's exact time, written in that dry gray only machines can make. Marcus read it in his head the way he now read the sky. 14:22. The number folded into his mind and chose a hook. "Station C," she said. 45 minutes. The carpet pushed back gently under his wheel, the way freshly cleaned carpet does. The row of public terminals made a tidy crescent, each screen cupped by short privacy wings that offered focus without hiding anyone. Marcus logged in. The keys were softened by 1,000 hands. The monitor blinked awake. He opened a blank page and typed 2 words in the top left corner. "Stellar classification." They sat there like a promise that might grow teeth if fed the right questions. He pulled up the diagram he loved, the one that turns color and temperature into a map. He leaned forward until the sloping band of stars seemed to warm the glass with its own breath. That was when the hush warped. Voices rose at the front desk. Not loud, just the frayed edge of a rope that has been pulled too long. Marcus looked up. Miss Patterson stood with her palms resting on the counter. Her voice stayed even. Across from her a man shifted, weight in his heels, like someone who expects the next word to be a no. His hair tangled to his collar, his coat held the dull shine of dried damp. He smelled like outside and sleep that did not belong to a bed. Exhaustion tugged his jaw. The way fear pulls a fishing line. "I just need to send one email," he said. "One message." "I know," she answered. "I truly do. But the system requires identification for a guest pass without an address. I cannot issue it. The address is the problem," he muttered. "That is what I am trying to fix." Other patrons looked away without abandoning him. The careful library gaze that says, "I will not add heat to this moment." A page turned. The radiator clicked again. Marcus felt the old fork open in his chest. One path led to quiet safety. The other pointed toward the same simple choice that had bent his whole life 2 days earlier. He saved his document. He rolled back until he could see the timer on his screen as well as the desk. 41 minutes remained. "Miss Patterson," he called, not loud, just enough to cross the carpet. She glanced and her face moved from staff to person in a breath. He swallowed the extra words and kept only the necessary ones. "He can use my session." The man turned. His eyes were raw and suspicious in the same blink. Up close, Marcus saw the tremor in his fingers, the flinch of a body trained by 100 little refusals. Marcus kept his gaze on the man's face and made his own steady. "You do not have to," Miss Patterson began. "I am not using it right now," Marcus said. "He can send one email." The man's mouth opened and shut. "You would do that? For me, you need to send something important," Marcus said. "That seems more urgent than my homework." "For this session," Miss Patterson said, already moving from behind the counter, so the man would not have to approach rules. He did not have the strength to face. "I will sit right there. Next time, Seer, you will need documentation. Today, we can do it through his time." The man straightened, like a line uncoiling. "I will be fast," he said. He looked at Marcus. "I am Robert." "Marcus," he said. Marcus rolled back to Station C and logged out. The small hourglass icon froze. Robert lowered himself into the chair with the care learned on bad ground. Ms. Patterson set a disinfecting wipe beside the keyboard with no comment, the same as she did for every patron. Robert's hands hovered as if letters might fly off if he grabbed too quickly. He began to type, cautious and slow, eyes darting between keys and screen, like a man speaking to someone who might leave. Marcus took the end seat in the row, angled so he could see the corner of his pause timer without turning. He did not invade the screen. He watched posture and breath, the quiet guard of a kid who has learned that witnessing can be a kind of help. "Do you need help?" he asked, voice low enough to keep privacy intact. "I am fine," Robert said, a small beat. "I am not fine, but I know what to say." "It will reach her," Marcus said. He could not promise. He felt it like weather in his bones. Robert's voice found a flat place to stand. "Dear Sarah," he murmured as he typed, "I am sorry. I am sober now. I am trying to be better. I understand if you do not answer. I want you to know I am still here." He wrote the subject last. 3 short words that looked like a hand raised above a crowd. "I am trying." 30 minutes. 28. 25. The seconds sighed down the screen's edge. 2 stations over. A teen watched a speed run with one earbud loose. An older woman read a thread about pruning roses. The room held all of it without complaint. Ms. Patterson sat nearby with a paperback open, the practiced posture of a lifeguard pretending to study the sky. Marcus felt the small current of approval she sent his way. It steadied him more than warming air could. "I used to teach," Robert said without lifting his gaze. "English. I told kids to write their fear. Then one sentence passed the fear. I forgot how. You remembered now, Marcus said. Robert nodded once, quick as a tick. He typed the address into the field at the top with deliberate care, as if any extra flourish might scare the chance away. He read it under his breath one time. Like a vow, the cursor blinked at the end of the message. The mouse hovered over the send button, retreated, hovered again. He pressed his knuckles to his nose, his mouth twisted. He clicked. A thin gray bar rose and filled. The mail client offered a plain word in a plain box. Sent. The system clock in the taskbar changed its last 2 digits, as if a cue had been whispered. Marcus felt his lungs empty in that exact blink. He glanced. The line in the sent folder carried the truth in tiny type. Today's date, 1641. He spoke it silently to himself, the way he had spoken the other pegs. Stamp at 9:12. Live at 9:58. Post at 10:03. Segment backup at 12:17. Now, library. Send at 16:41. The chain linked with a small inner click. Robert did not stand. His fingers hovered over letters as if they might rise and spell out a softer life. Miss Patterson rose and walked the row, without forcing eye contact. The ritual of the place. Do you need a print for your records? She asked, as though this were the end of every email. No, he said. That would be strange. He paused. Maybe, yes. The sent notice, for me to look at if she does not answer. Click the message in send, she said. File. Print. Black and white. The printer breathed out a warm rectangle of paper. She checked only for clear ink, slid it into a manila sleeve, and handed it over. For your bag, so it stays flat. The top corner showed the subject line, the first 2 words, and the digital stamp. Calm and municipal. Sent at 1641. The plainness of it calmed the room. Marcus watched the page change hands and felt courage rise like the scent of toner. Robert stood and faced him. Up close, his eyes held the ocean color. The sky finds under cloud. Thank you, he said. You do not even know me. I know you needed to write. Marcus said. That was enough. I might not get an answer. Robert said. I might have broken that bridge years ago. You tried. Marcus said. Now she knows that. What would you want if you were her? Robert asked. To know you're trying is real. Marcus said. More than once. Robert nodded like a student who has learned a test is not a trap. I will try again, he said. Not today. Soon. We are piloting a sponsor pass next month. Ms. Patterson added, clearing her throat in the softest possible way. It will not fix everything. It will help. Robert's mouth opened around a word that did not arrive. He tucked the sleeve into his bag like something living. I will be back, he said. May I shake your hand? You can, Marcus said, and offered his right. The grip was careful. The carefulness of hands that have held breakable things wrong and want to learn again. When the door closed behind him, the library exhaled and then returned to its steady work. The timer on Station C still showed minutes that belonged to Marcus. Do you want the rest? Ms. Patterson asked. He shook his head. He used it correctly. She smiled without showing teeth. He did. Marcus rolled to the window and watched Robert walk down the steps with his shoulders squared in the way of a man carrying a rope of paper. Outside, the sky pulled a thin gray veil over the blue. Somewhere in the stacks, a toddler laughed once, then remembered the sign and held the rest of the laugh like a secret. He returned to Station C, not to type, but to gather the small proofs the day had left. The heat paper slipped by the mouse read its gray time. The first peg set when he arrived. He pressed it into his notebook and wrote one line under it with a pencil that squeaked on the paper. Robert sent at 1641. Thank you, he told Miss Patterson as he rolled past. For what? She asked. For letting it be what it was, he said. Not larger, not smaller. That is the job, she said, and the heart of it. On the way out, he paused at the bulletin board where flyers leaned like tired friends. A new sheet had been pinned flat. Silver tacks at the corners. Community forum on access. Date and time. Contact. Direction. Not drama. He felt something ease under his shoulder blades. The bus stop glass held a crooked copy of the morning's photo. The red stamp sat in the center, grainy and still certain. A teenager had scrawled a tag below it with a marker that would fade by spring. Marcus did not read it. He watched the paper breathe and kept moving. At home, he would lift the telescope onto the balcony and adjust one leg by a single notch. He would line the finder scope on a bright point and breathe until the shake left his hands. He would not speak of the library unless Rosa asked. He would store the day where proof lives. The slip, the clock, the print, the sleeve, the way Robert's shoulders changed when the bar said "sent" across town. In a quiet apartment, a woman named Sarah would see a new message arrive, with a plain subject line and a time that pinned the moment to the day. She would not open it yet. She would look at the time and feel the number sit in her palm like a coin, heavy with choice. 1641. Evening arrived without ceremony, the kind that slips into rooms on quiet shoes and begins arranging shadows. Marcus pushed through the apartment door with library dust in his sleeves, and the steadiness that follows a hard choice done right. The air held onion and heat, the soft steam that meant Rosa had chosen simple food that warms rather than dazzles. The telescope leaned by the balcony like a folded animal waiting for night. On the shelf by the door, the clear plastic case glinted. On the table, the envelope lay face up, the red square as calm as a heartbeat. Rosa turned from the stove. Relief crossed her face first, then the crease of a worry she had saved for later. She wiped her hands and touched the place on his chair where fabric meets metal. How was school? Like fluorescent lights, he said, which made her smile despite herself. The library was better. You finished your chart. I lent my time, he said. A man needed to send an email. Her hand paused, breath catching with it, a tiny sound only family hears. Did you know him? No, he said. I knew the need. Tell me after you eat, she said, and lifted the lid. Steam rose, carrying salt and garlic and the comfort of an ordinary pot. They ate at the small table by the window. The street below wore evening the way a good sweater wears a person. Marcus told it straight. The heat paper slip, the station letter, the timer, the way the man's hands hovered, as if letters might flee. He said the name because names keep lives from slipping. Robert, he said. He wrote to his daughter. He clicked send at the time the system marked as 1641. Rosa closed her eyes. On that time, the way a nurse closes eyes on a pulse, to feel its truth without disturbing it. She set her chopsticks down. You were careful. I kept sightlines, he said. Miss Patterson was 3 steps away. I did not give contact. He did not add how his chest had opened at the old fork and chosen the path that was not safety. A knock threaded the steam. Axe's knock, 2 soft and 1 softer. Rosa called, "Come in," and he stepped to the sink as if the room had taught him where to be. He washed and dried without fuss, then took the chair near the door. He did not crowd the space. He did not pretend he was not large. I heard the library version, he said. Ms. Patterson is reliable. Heat crawled up Marcus's throat. I did not do it to be told, he said. Good, Axe answered. That makes me less nervous than the other way. Rosa poured him tea without asking. He wrapped both hands around the cup and let the heat speak first. Then he turned it in his palms and looked at Marcus the way a man checks a chain before he trusts it with weight. You did a good thing, he said, and let the sentence stand on its own legs. Then he set the second sentence beside it. We need to keep you from paying for it the wrong way. Marcus braced without meaning to, knuckles resting on rubber. Rosa reached for the threads. I told him to tell me after he ate, she said. Now I am saying it to both of you. Tell me the part that keeps him safe. Axe nodded, not for permission, for respect of sequence. He lifted one finger, not for show, for counting. Rule 1, he said. Proximity. If you help, keep distance in the body, a counter, a desk, a table between. Today was right. Marcus pictured the half-circle of terminals like shields and nodded. Rule 2. Witness. Never alone. Library, good. Bus, good if you sit near the driver. Alley, not good. He glanced at Rosa in the way teammates check footing. Rosa's mouth tightened and then softened. That one I already love, she said. Rule 3. Check in. You text me or Rosa a single word. In when you enter, out when you leave. No story, just the peg. We answer with a dot. A dot? Rosa repeated, trying it on her tongue. She nodded. Easy. Rule 4. No home address to strangers. Not spoken, not written, not on any screen. Meet only in public if a meeting must happen. And tell one of us first. Rule 5. Axe said, voice carrying the grit of road. Pride is a trap. If your gut says go, you go. No teasing, no tests of bravery. Leaving is not losing. He drank his tea without noise and set the cup down where the ring had already cooled. Precision of a man who has learned to make as little new mess as possible. Rosa looked like someone who had just watched a good nurse explain a procedure with both wisdom and mercy. You think he will be asked again? She said. Yes. Axe said. The story has moved. People will test the code you showed them. Marcus swallowed. The nod he gave felt heavier than his head. He reached into his backpack and took out the manila sleeve. From the library. He did not trumpet it. He placed it beside the envelope with the red stamp and the clear case with the white label. 3 objects. A small museum of a day that had spilled into another. Rosa traced the edge of the plastic with one finger. The tidy handwriting on the label looked like it belonged to someone who returns things better than they were found. Segment backup, she read. Then the time, written longhand. She breathed in and out, steady as daybreak. We keep these here, she said. If anyone tries to bend the tail, we have the bone. The phone on the counter buzzed against glass. That small insect sound that means a text rather than a call. Rosa turned the screen. The message preview was short. Valkyrie. She opened it and passed the phone to Axe, and then to Marcus, and then back again. A loop of trust. A still frame filled the glass. A ledger lay open on a counter worn by honest work. 2 columns headed with tidy letters. Money in and money out. A hand with nicked rings held the page flat. A small red dater sat in the corner like a patient beetle. Below the columns, signatures. Valkyrie's strong hand, and a second line, where Axe had printed his name in block letters. Witness. Above the signatures, neat sum, not a spectacle. Enough to warm rooms, to stock groceries, to buy books of bus passes. At the bottom right, the red square pressed clean and exact, closed at the hour, the photo named as 2130, Rosa Exaled. Is this for us? Axe shook his head. For the sponsor pass fund and the food bank, he said. The riders wanted to divert heat away from your apartment. They will protect your quiet. The ledger will live in the shop. Anyone can read it. No cash without paper. Everything signs in, signs out. Marcus looked at the stamp until numbers stopped being numbers and turned into edges he could grip. He imagined the thumb on the dater and the soft thunk, the smell of ink settling into fibers. He imagined Axe's block letters. Careful, as if carefulness itself were part of the protection. "Thank you," Rosa said, not to a single person, but to the shape the day had taken. They built the rest of the night out of small tasks. Rosa wrote a list on the inside of a cupboard door with pencil, places to call when the sponsor pass meeting had a date, questions to take to the city about addresses and exceptions and dignity. Marcus rinsed dishes and left them to dry in a rack that leaned without complaint. Axe checked balcony bolts and chair casters, the tiny things that fail when people look only at the big ones. Between tasks, the talk knitted itself. "What did he write?" Rosa asked, gently. Marcus heard the library sentence again, the one Robert had fished out of an old teacher's self. He began with "dear" to his daughter. He said he was sorry. He said he was trying. He stopped there. The shape was enough. Axe leaned a hip to the counter. "You told the truth on camera, and then told it at a desk," he said. "Those two truths do not always walk together." His face held the memory of years when they had not. Marcus wheeled to the shelf and pulled his notebook from between cookbooks. He pressed the heat paper slip to a clean page and rubbed until it held. He wrote a single line beneath in pencil, sharpened down to a stubborn little length. Robert sent at the time the system marked as 1641. He dated it. He set the book beside the envelope and the case, 3 pegs in a wall that would be asked to carry more weight. The apartment found the stillness that arrives just before stars begin to confess themselves. They stepped onto the balcony when the sky allowed. The air tasted of iron and wet bark. Axe adjusted tripod legs until the eyepiece met Marcus without strain. Marcus pointed to a bright bead and eased the focus ring forward. That tiny secret sound like a safe turning. Bands slid into view, pale and sure. Small companions lined up like punctuation that refuses to wobble. "You were right," Rosa said from the doorway. "Proof in the dark. Proof in the dark." Marcus echoed, and the phrase felt like a tool he could hold without cutting himself. They came in with the kind of tired that feels like clean sheets. Rosa set her alarm for a time too early for stories, because work does not care about wonder. Axe put on his jacket, checked his pockets, in the order that had kept him alive, and paused by the table. He looked at the 3 objects, and then at Marcus. "If anyone tries to turn you into a symbol you did not choose," he said, "show the case, the envelope, the notebook, and say this is what happened. No more, no less." Marcus nodded, and the nod settled like the first brick in a wall built to the right height. The phone buzzed again. Valkyrie, brief as always, 2 photographs. The ledger again, now with a slim strip of receipt paper taped to the margin. Bus pass booklet. Purchased. The second was the ledger corner where the red square sat darker, now that the ink had settled. Under the stamp, a line in neat hand. "Next count scheduled at the same night hour. Written out for all to see as 21:30 tomorrow." Rosa held the screen up, so the light made a small square on the ceiling. She laughed once, quiet and edged with trust. "Bureaucracy as a blessing," she said. "Paper is a strange kind of mercy," Axe said, and his grin put a crease in the room that did not hurt. He left with a hand placed exactly right on Marcus's shoulder and a nod to Rosa that meant later and safe. The door closed on soft steps. The building settled the way old buildings do when they decide to hold through the night. Marcus rolled to the table and squared the 3 objects again. He listened for apartment sound, the low hum of the fridge, a neighbor's running sink, the clock over the stove with a second hand that works like a small animal. He added a line to his notebook and dated it. Ledger closed at the night hour. Written out as 21:30. He did not underline it. He did not need to. He brushed his teeth and let the water warm his fingers. He wheeled back to the balcony for one last look. The planet held. The beads held, his breath let go of him in a slow line. Back inside, he reached for the lamp. The phone flickered one last time. A wing beat of light. A quiet rider thread carried the ledger photo with a caption in plain words. Counted. Signed. Stumpet. Closed. Night hour, set in ink. The red square looked the size of a coin. It might as well have been a seal on a door. Marcus felt the day's bolt find its strike plate. He lowered the lamp. In the soft dark, the letters of the time remained clear. The peg held, tidy as ink, ready for whatever next might try to move it. Morning arrived with the soft grit of routine, and a thin light that made the halls look scrubbed and new. Marcus rolled into school through air that smelled of wet wool and pencil shavings. The hallway lights hummed their tired song. His palms found their rhythm on the rims. Left, then right, the quiet scrape that meant moving forward without asking permission. The first difference came in glances. Not everyone looked away. A seventh grader with braces said hello without flinching at the chair. Two eighth graders paused the playful shove that used to be a joke and let him pass clean. Respect was not a burst of confetti. It was small breaks pressed before harm. He felt those breaks engaging here and there, like early stars that come on before you expect them. Homeroom brought a note on the board in the careful hand of a teacher who practices clarity. Assembly after second period. Auditorium. Attendance taken. No phones. The room rustled. Someone whispered, "Is this about the motorcycles?" Someone else whispered, "It is about kindness." Marcus kept his eyes on the desk a second longer than necessary, steadying the part of him that disliked rooms full of faces pretending to listen. Between bells, the principal's office sent a message that slid across classroom screens in the cool voice of system text. It named a new reporting form and a posted timeline. It named staff training and a listening session for students. The time block wrote itself in his head as a peg he could hold. Early afternoon in the library, annex, he liked the dullness of the words. Dull words often meant real change. Second period stretched like old gum. The room smelled of whiteboard cleaner and the ghost of fruit. When the bell cut the day open again, the building coughed everyone toward the auditorium. Stage lights flattened faces. The principal stepped out in a suit that tried not to be a suit. He held the microphone like a pen rather than a weapon. "Our community has been talking," he said, voice even all the way to the back. He spoke the words, "your story and your safety," without sugar. He did not say inspiration. Marcus felt the absence like a kindness. "We are implementing an anti-bullying protocol," the principal said. "There will be timelines and names and doors that stay open. We failed some of you." He let the sentence stand on its own legs. The room shifted, surprised by the lack of padding. "We will do better starting now." A counselor stepped forward with a stack of pocket cards. A physical thing meant to live on cork and fridge doors. Hotline, email, office hours, names of actual people. Marcus filed the details the way he cataloged stars. He did not trust speeches. He trusted anchors. A teacher moderated a short student panel. Two microphones rested on the table like shared tools. A girl from the track team spoke about elbows in hallways that are not accidents. A boy from band admitted the jokes he used to pass along had been lazy and mean. Marcus did not raise his hand. He did not want to become the story about the story. When the panel ended, the principal added one last piece. "Next week, we will hold an assembly to honor compassion. We will ask the right person if he wants to attend." He looked at Marcus without performing it. "If he says no, we will honor that too." The bell sent everyone back into motion. In the stairs, a boy from science class drifted beside him and pressed the elevator button without asking if he needed help. Courtesy defeated pity. by being almost invisible. Third period, science brought a simple lab on heat transfer. The projector made dust dance. A whisper crossed the lab tables and did not land on him. "Feels different today," someone said. "It does," someone answered. Marcus kept his head down and finished the worksheet. Familiar work steadied his hand. At lunch, the cafeteria hum had a new pitch. Not kite-friendly, not hostile, a wary truce. Learning to become muscle memory, he reached the line, and someone stepped back and waved him forward with a small chin lift that did not make a show of anything. He took a seat near the windows where the cold light made everything honest. A voice at his shoulder asked, "May I?" and did not push. A short girl with a spiral notebook hovered with a tray. "You can," he said, and angled the chair. "I am Lena," she said. "I sit behind you in English. You said that thing about two truths at once. It was good." "Thank you," Marcus said. Lena opened the notebook. The first page held a neat calendar for debate meets. She tapped a box, like she was pointing at a star on a map. "We need a researcher," she said. "You are careful with facts. Will you help with prep? You do not have to watch the meets. You can say no." He thought of Jupiter's bands sliding into focus. When you take your time, he thought of the library clock and the heat paper slip. He thought of the principal saying we failed without padding. He looked at the calendar and saw a road. "I can help," he said. Relief softened her shoulders. She ate half her sandwich, set the rest down, and asked what sources he liked for case studies. He said the quiet names a person says when they love doing a thing and do not want to turn it into a performance. She wrote without hurrying. He felt something like belonging, stirring where a bruise used to live. The afternoon kept offering small frames that looked like change. A hall monitor asked two boys to pick up a cup they had tossed and did not turn it into a scene. A teacher redirected a joke before it sprouted legs. A flyer bloomed on a corkboard with dates for staff training and student sessions. Marcus texted Rosa an in and later an out with his thumb, learning the rhythm of the dot reply without needing more word. Safety felt like practice rather than fear. Clouds stacked like slate. When the last bell let go, the wind combed the trees into a single slow shiver. Home smelled of soap and coffee, and the kind of quiet that waits without impatience. The envelope with the red stamp remained where they had left it. The clear plastic case sat on the shelf like a small guard. On the table, a brown paper parcel waited with a neat line of black marker across the top flap. "Marcus, from Axe." He slit the tape with the careful edge of a key and peeled the paper back. Leather lay inside, heavy and soft, the weight of something built to last. The vest had been cut to his shape, narrower in the shoulders, the armholes generous without being sloppy. The lining brushed his fingers like a promise. The back was blank, no club patch. This was not that and did not pretend. Over the left breast, a small rectangle of felt had been basted in place, pale chalk letters so faint he had to tilt the cloth to catch them. "Honorary brother." Rosa stood at his shoulder with a hand over her mouth the way a person tries to hold a laugh that is mostly a tear. Beneath the vest lay a second small envelope. He opened it and found a cloth patch with white letters on black. Simple and true. "Kindness is courage." The edges were raw, meant for hand sewing. Under the patch, a note in Axe's block letters. "If you want this, we will sew it here. If not, we will keep it safe and say the words anyway." The vest was not a costume. It was permission to belong without pretending. Marcus slipped it on. The leather settled across his shoulders like steady hands. In the mirror on the closet door, he did not look larger, only located, as if a map had finally added his exact street. There was a small sewing kit in the kitchen drawer, a plastic box With a hinge that clicked like a friendly tooth, the needle shone with the calm of a useful tool. The black thread felt like silk against his fingers. Rosa threaded the needle on her second try and tied a knot neat as a coin. She touched the blank space over the left breast, and then the patch. "Here," she said. "If you want it here." "Here," he said. "Please." They cleared the table. The apartment quieted itself like a room making space for ceremony. Rosa set the vest flat and pinned the corners with 4 glass headpins that caught the light like tiny planets. Her breath slowed. The needle went down through leather and cloth with a soft, resistant slide, a sound like a small door closing gently. Marcus watched the thread pull through and lie flat. He felt each stitch as if it touched the skin beneath. A soft knock came while she worked the top edge. Axe stepped in, washed at the sink without fuss, and stood at the table with his hands behind his back. He did not speak until the knot held. "Looks right," he said. He set a small tin beside Rosa's elbow. "Beeswax," he said, "for the thread. Les drag." Rosa waxed the line and continued, each stitch a twin to the last, the border growing like a frame around truth. Marcus held the patch still while she turned the vest to keep her hands from cramping. The room smelled faintly of leather and tea, and the clean, sweet note of wax. The stove clock counted even seconds. Somewhere below, a door clicked, and another answered, the building breathing like a living thing. Lena texted a question about a source. Marcus sent a link and one sentence. "Check the methodology." Her thumbs sent back a small thumb and a single dot. His dot from earlier echoed by hers, the rhythm of simple signals that did not crowd a moment. "Almost done." Rosa murmured, and bit the thread to snug the knot before turning the final corner. Her fingers moved with the calm that comes from long practice at small necessary work. The needle dove and rose. The words settled. Marcus thought about the new cards in student pockets, and the dates on the flyer and the principal's plane "We fail." He thought about the ledger photo with its red square pressed clean in a corner, and the night hour marked in ink, and the way the library clock had turned. When a message left a building, none of those things shouted. All of them held. Rosa tied the last knot with a firm, small tug, pressed it flat with her thumbnail, and snipped the thread. She ran a thumb lightly along the seam to test for snags, lifted the vest, and shook it once, gentle as setting down a sleeping cat. The patch did not flutter. It was home. Axe breathed like a man seeing a bridge finished. "Say the words," he said. "Not to make a scene, to close a circle." Marcus looked down at the patch, at the letters that would meet the world before his voice sometimes could. He said them low, the way a person reads a vow to themselves first. "Kindness is courage." The phrase fit the room. Axe took a single photograph with the flash off, framing only the vest from collarbone to rib. The patch centered, Rosa's fingers still near the edge, his own fingertip in a corner, as proof of presence. He saved it and did not share it. "Your call about where it goes," he said. "Not yet," Marcus said. "Let it be ours first." "Good," Axe said, and his grin creased the quiet without breaking it. Marcus slipped the vest on again. The leather held his shape. The patch sat where it should. He rolled his shoulders and felt the seam move with him without pulling. The words over his heart did not weigh more than cloth. They weighed exactly enough. In his notebook, he wrote a line under last night's entry, with a pencil dulled by work. "Vest finished this evening. Patch sewn by hand." He did not write the hour. He did not need to. Proof lived in the seam, in the wax on the thread, in the memory of the needle passing through. Rosa put the kit away. Axe washed 2 cups and set them to dry. The room settled like a held breath released. Marcus touched the patch once more, not to check stitches, but to greet the words where they would live, needle through cloth, thread pulled clean, not pressed flat. Those were the last sounds before the quiet took the room back, and the truth over his heart felt steady enough to meet whatever waited beyond the door. The week did not announce itself with noise. It came like a draft under a door, cool and certain, carrying a shift that had already begun elsewhere. Marcus felt it first in the library annex, where the listening session filled earlier than expected. Folding chairs scraped, soft and cautious, as people decided where belonging might sit. Paper smelled like paper, floor polish like effort, winter like iron. Rosa arrived on her lunch break with her hair pinned in the way that says tired and present at once. Axe stood against the wall, 5 minutes early, large without intruding, a piece of steady furniture with a pulse. The principal opened the door himself and put a pitcher of water at the end of the table. "Thank you for coming," he said, without varnish. A laminated sign asked for silent phone. The radiator hissed once, as if agreeing to try. The first voices were soft, and soft did not mean weak. A teacher admitted the staircase jokes had lingered too long without a name. A sophomore read 2 simple lines from a notebook about hallways that become rivers and bodies told to swim alone. Miss Patterson raised a hand and said the library is for everyone, and we will align our rules with the world we have, not the world we wish for. The room nodded, the way people nod when truth lands without performance. Then a woman in a crisp blazer stood without waiting to be called. Her voice carried warmth the way ice carries light. "I have a concern," she said. "We all love a story, but children must be protected from exploitation. It appears a motorcycle group is using this boy to wash its reputation. Gifts with cameras, patches near microphones. The optics are not subtle. My question is simple. Who is steering this story? Who is safeguarding this child?" The word exploitation changed the air. Chairs shifted, heat thinned. Marcus felt his palms touch his rims and hover. He kept his eyes on the table edge where the wood had been smoothed by earlier hand. He breathed as Axe had taught him, in through his nose like a string pulled true, out through his teeth like a knot seated firm. The principal began a careful answer. Rosa set her hand flat on the table, not to interrupt, to claim a square of surface with a mother's right. Her voice was gentle in the way that does not bend. "I am safeguarding him," she said. "I am his mother. I accept help when help is honest, and I decline it when it is not." She looked at Marcus and then at the room. "The story belongs to us. We did not ask for a savior. We asked for fairness. And when we could not have it, we accepted help to build a fairer corner." A murmur lifted and settled. The woman in the blazer adjusted her sleeve and turned her gaze to Axe. "And the photos," she said. "The leather, the language of family, the newspapers. Who benefits?" Axe did not leave the wall. His voice arrived without weight. "A tool rather than a weapon. We benefit when we live our code," he said. The boy benefited when strangers saw a person rather than a camera moment. The town benefited when policy changed. And if you want to measure benefit, let us measure with paper that does not lie. He reached into a canvas bag and placed 3 objects on the table, with the economy of a mechanic setting parts in a line. A clear plastic case with a white label, an envelope marked with a red square, a manila sleeve with a single sheet. He did not fan them like cards. He set them in a neat row, close enough that chain of custody felt like more than a phrase. Rosa slid her chair back half a foot, the way a nurse clears a tray for instruments. The principal stepped aside without being asked. When the room's gaze steadied, Axe began, touching nothing until the eyes had landed. "This is the envelope that carried rent relief," he said, turning the flap to the room. "The red square is crisp. The date and the time are pressed clean." He read the time aloud, the way a medic reads a chart, so the number becomes air. The stamp says 0912. We did not stamp it. The property office did when funds posted. Their ledger holds the entry. They will speak if needed. He lifted the clear case by its edges, not by the label. The sticker on the spine carried tidy print and a time written in full words. Segment backup, 12:17. He set it down on a cloth Rosa had put beneath his hand, as if the table itself could be a witness. This is a copy of the raw segment and the full interview backup from the morning show, he said. The station logged it at 12:17. A producer signed it out to us at 12:28. We did not cut it. We asked for a copy because people forget what they say when lights go dark. The station will confirm the log. He placed the manila sleeve last. The sheet slid into view with the calm of municipal type. The subject line looked like a raised hand in a crowd. I am trying. In the corner, the system had printed a time with quiet authority. He spoke it. This shows a send recorded at 16:41. The session was locked. Ms. Patterson is present and can speak to the procedure. Ms. Patterson lifted her hand again, and her presence did the rest. Axe did not raise his voice. He let order do the lifting. If the question is who controls a narrative, he said, the answer is paper that anyone can read. If the question is who safeguards a child, the answer is the person who sees him as a person. The mother in this room, the librarian who bent a rule only into fairness and then fixed it for all. The principal who wrote timelines instead of slogans. You do not have to like leather. You do have to look at ink. The woman in the blazer opened her mouth and found fewer places to set words. She gestured at the case, at the envelope, at the sheet, as if pointing could scrape, meaning loose. And the money, she said, drawing the noun as if length might change it. The ongoing fund, the ledger you mention in your publicity. Where is accountability there? Valkyrie had come in at the back without ceremony. Winter metal in her hair and patience in her posture. She did not push forward. She lifted her phone and tapped. The principal's tablet chimed where it rested face down. He turned it over. A photograph filled the glass. A ledger lay open on a counter worn by years. Columns, sums, signatures. In the bottom corner, the red square sat like a seal. The caption was plain, counted, signed, stamped, closed. 21:30. He turned the screen so the room could see. You can review this in the office any day after it closes. He said, receipts are taped in, names are legible, times are printed. Make an appointment with the treasurer if you want the long version. It will not be a show. It will be a desk and a pen. The woman's mouth narrowed, not in defeat, in recalibration. She looked at Marcus then, perhaps for the first time, not at his chair or his vest, but at his face. And you? She said, do you consent to being associated with this group? Do you understand the implications? Marcus kept his hands quiet. He thought of the small rectangles stitched over his heart, how cloth can hold meaning without pretending to be a flag. He thought of bands on a giant planet that do not raise their voice and still convince a person that order exists out there. He thought of the library clock rolling a pair of numbers. When Robert clicked send, I understand my life, he said. I understand who stood in the rain and who stayed when the cameras left. I consent to family that acts like family, and I can show you when each thing happened. If memory wants help, his voice did not crack or aim for eloquence. It carried the simple weight of a list. The room exhaled, not applause, release. The accusation lay opened and flat, its seams visible, its stuffing ordinary. Hands rose for other questions, the kind that lead to work rather than spectacle. How to volunteer at the food bank. How to bring the sponsor pass pilot to other rooms where documents are demanded from people who do not have them. Which staff member owns the new form? Who watches the hotline after hours? Marcus did not answer. He did not have to. His name had done its part, and the work no longer needed his name to move. Rosa gathered the objects with end-of-procedure grace. Wipe, case, sleeve, envelope, each returned to the bag with the care of someone who believes in tomorrow. Axe stepped back to the wall and let his size blur again. At the door, the principal touched Marcus's shoulder with 2 fingers, brief and respectful. "Thank you for bringing proof," he said. "Thank you for wanting it." Marcus said. The hallway felt taller. The bones of the building had shifted a small distance toward true winter light through high windows turned dust to slow planets. Ms. Patterson met them at the fountain and raised an eyebrow. Rosa lifted the manila sleeve an inch by way of answer. Ms. Patterson's shoulders softened. He clicked send at 1641. Marcus said, "Because sometimes you say a time aloud to remind the day it happened. We are putting larger clocks at every terminal." Ms. Patterson said, "Small changes sometimes need big fonts." Outside, engines idled and then settled into quiet, the riders meeting the room's tone with their own. Valkyrie leaned against a fender and lifted a hand. No speech. She pointed at her watch, then at Axe, then at Marcus, a tiny choreography of time and trust. 21:30. Her finger wrote in the air without words. At home, the apartment smelled of tea and the faint, sweet ghost of beeswax from the night of sewing. The vest hung on the chair back like a second spine. The patch read the room without asking to be read. Rosa set the canvas bag on the table and took out the 3 shapes just far enough to see their edges. Enough. Later, a message arrived from Act. Not faces. A table. 3 objects in a row. A cup of water sweating a ring. 4 times written as words. Nothing else. 0912. 1217. 1641. 2130. Marcus looked until the times were not numbers, but pegs driven through the day so firmly, even wind would have to work to move them. Night came. He rolled the telescope onto the balcony and let his hand meet the focus ring. The way a locksmith meets an old safe, bands slid into certainty. Small moons drew a line. A car door shut below. A neighboring screen locked. In his chest, the day made the sound a bolt makes when it finds its plate. He did not speak. He did not need to. The proof held. The world had been asked to choose between a story about a boy and the boy himself. He answered with time and paper, and a mother's hand on a table, and a writer's thumb on a dater, and a librarian's steady yes. The stars kept their appointments. His breath matched their patience. Inside, the vest waited. He touched the seam and felt the words over his heart resolve into the same sentence as the Times. Tomorrow would ask for another clause. Tonight the period was a red square pressed clean at a late hour. Ink dry. Promise kept. Morning returned like a patient hand on a shoulder, steady without hurry. Marcus woke to the apartment's small hum, the faint whisper of the radiator, the soft line of the fridge, the distant water in someone else's pipes. The vest hung on the chair as if it had always lived there. The patch read the room without asking to be read. He touched the seam with a single finger, the way a person checks a door they already know is locked. Then he rolled to the balcony and let the cold answer his skin. Cloud thinned in long veils. The telescope waited like a trusted instrument. He did not look through it yet. He watched the light gather and thought of the library annex. The table. The 3 objects in a row. The cup ring drying into a dull halo. He heard again the careful voices that had refused to bleed. Paper had held, ink had held, his chest felt arranged. School brought the honest work of systems changing. Honest work is dull, and dull is good. In homeroom, a counselor slipped a small stack of hotline cards into the pouch at the back of his chair and tapped the corner once as if to say, "Here, when you need them." In English, Lena lifted her notebook and, without ceremony, showed a column of case studies he had sent. She had drawn small stars beside the ones with clean methods. He felt the quiet hum of being useful, not as a symbol but as a mind other minds could lean on. After the bell, the annex held a different kind of meeting, not a listening session, just the business of making a promise real. Ms. Patterson had placed a clipboard on the table with forms for a sponsor pass program written in plain words. A pilot would begin the following week. 2 stations each hour would be reserved for patrons without addresses and placed near the desk. One form would record the sponsor's name and the session time. A second would sign the patron in and out with a staff witness. Above the terminals, new clocks hung with faces large enough to read from the door. "We do the work in the light," Ms. Patterson said, the way a person might say, "Please, rinse your cups." She handed Marcus a sheet with lines for signatures and a small square for notes. The city seal a pale watermark underneath. He felt again how paper can be mercy when someone writes it clean. On his way out, his phone thrummed with the soft drum he used for library messages. A single line in the preview stilled the chair. "A response to your sponsored session has been received." He turned back. Ms. Patterson looked up, read his face, and asked if he wanted to view it there. He nodded. She shifted the monitor toward him, entered a staff credential, with the calm of someone who has kept many kinds of confidences, and opened the activity log. The line sat in the middle of the list, not bold, not lit, simply another row. A reply had arrived late in the morning. The subject began with a name, Sarah. The preview offered a sentence that did not know it would change the air. "I got your message. I am not ready to forgive. I am ready to talk." Marcus swallowed. The screen kept being a screen. Ms. Patterson printed a notice for the staff file. Not the email itself, only the fact of it with the time and the session tag that linked to the small heat strip in his notebook. She slid the print into a clear sleeve and set the dater on the corner. The red circle kissed the paper. He stood the extra second it takes to see a mark set. "Thank you," he said. Words felt smaller than the thing. "You are welcome," she said, then added with a smile that did not cheapen the moment. "Small fonts need big clocks, and heavy moments need quiet printers." He texted Rosa and Axe from the hallway, not to make a noise, to place a peg. Reply received. 2 dots returned in order, a mother and a writer, a pair of small receipts, his body filed by heart. That evening Robert came to the annex at the hour Ms. Patterson had arranged. He had shaved. The line of his jaw showed again, thinner than it used to be. His shirt was clean, though the collar had known other days. His hands did not shake. He smelled like soap and books, and a thin thread of fear he was not ashamed of. He sat without performing. He listened while Ms. Patterson explained the sponsor pass on a sheet he could take. She showed him the large clock and the sign in line on the page. She slid over a small laminated card with a 6-digit number that would stand for an address until an address came back. Marcus did not lean in. He kept his eyes on his own wheels until the shape of the moment settled. Robert stood and came to him with the care of a person stepping onto a pier after a hard swim. Tears lived in his eyes, not performed, not weaponized. "She wrote back," he said. "She wrote back, and she wants to talk. And it is possible I do not deserve to talk, and also I will try to be the man who deserves it." Marcus nodded. Because the wrong word could tilt a thing like this, he found the exact place where sympathy and respect meet. "I am glad," he said. He did not say proud. He did not say "I told you so." He said the simplest true thing, and it held. They set a time for a call. Miss Patterson wrote it on the sheet with the laminated number and underlined the hour so the eye would find it without hunting. She added a line noting that a staff member would be present for the first minute and then step away after consent. Procedure made safety a shared object, something that could sit on the table without feeling like a person standing in a doorway with crossed arms. At home, Rosa listened with her head tilted in the angle. That means two truths at once. She looked at the sleeve with the staff notice and its clean corner stamp, and slid it into Marcus's notebook. Beneath the heat strip that held the earlier time, she drew a small arrow between them and dated the margin. She was not writing a legend. She was making sure the floor could be found if the lights went out. Axe sent a time and place for the next day. The shop's back room smelled of oil and clean rags, the kind of clean only a place that gets filthy on purpose can keep. The ledger lay open with a brass weight holding the pages honest. Valkyrie stood with a pen. The cap snapped on the end, so it would not vanish. Two new lines glowed with ordinary clarity in the out column. Bus pass, books purchased, quantities matched to meeting notes. A small payment for a counselor's evening hours to monitor the hotline on weekends. Receipts were taped beside the entries. Names were legible. Times printed. The red square waited to close. When the hands on the wall reached their mark, "We do not waive this," Valkyrie said. "We show it to people who will do something with the seeing." Rosa read and nodded the nod. "That means we will sleep because we know where the weight sits." On the way out, Axe paused at a shelf and held a square of black cloth. He did not speak. He set it back. "Not yet," he said to a question no one asked. Marcus understood. Patches are vows. You do not sow new words while ink on a different promise is still drying. The call happened 2 days later. Marcus did not attend. It was not his call. He rolled to the balcony and angled the telescope, while the clock inside counted the hour. The sky had burned down to a patient blue. He swept left and up and found a pale lantern with a ring he had chased in pictures since he first loved night. He breathed and eased the focus. The ring slid into certainty. A circle that was not a circle, tilted like a question insisting on a better angle. "Saturn," he whispered, giving the name its old weight, order and distance and the discipline of the slow. He thought about rules written down and duties signed, and people choosing to be kept by promises rather than moods. He thought about rings and what holds them where they are. He thought of a father who had not left by choice, and a man who had, and a daughter who might allow a return. The door slid. Rosa stepped out, arms folded against the cold. "He is on," she said. Miss Patterson did the first minute, and then left them alone. There is crying. There is breathing. There are long pauses I have heard in hospital rooms, when words have to choose a shape that will not break the person holding them. Marcus did not ask what was said. He kept his eye at the eyepiece and let the ring hold. He adjusted with the small turns of a person who has learned not to overcorrect. He thought of hands on handles, of pride as a trap, of leaving when the gut says leave, and staying when the gut says stay. The difference between those two not being bravery but wisdom. When the call ended, Robert sent a short update for the sponsor file. He did not write poetry. He wrote facts. A meeting agreed in a public place. A time. A boundary. He would be sober. He would be on time. He would bring nothing but a book his daughter had loved. A book she might refuse, and that refusal would be honored. Ms. Patterson forwarded the staff note. She stamped the corner, because that is how you keep a trail warm. Marcus added the notice to his notebook with a small strip of tape and let the weight of the possible sit in his lap like a sleeping cat. It felt heavy. It did not hurt. The following week, The Compassion Assembly did not crown anyone. It named behaviors. It posted timelines on a slide and a wall, and then a website. Lena's team won a round because their evidence did not wobble when questioned. She touched her pen to his notebook at lunch, the way a person taps a glass to say "attention, please." He smiled and did not have to be careful about it. The writers ran a quiet charity route with more logistics than noise. There were boxes and lists and an operations board with erasable lines. They delivered bus pass books to a shelter and left without cameras. Valkyrie sent a picture only to the ledger file, receipts taped in, the red square kissing the corner at the late hour that had become their ritual. A new message from Sarah arrived with 3 plain sentences, and the breath between them. The meeting had happened. There was no forgiveness yet. There were conditions. There would be a second talk in a month. If the first month held, Robert added his own line beneath hers. "I will hold it." Marcus went to the balcony as if the sky had rung a small bell. The ring in the eyepiece was faint and sure. He did not make it an omen. He let it be itself, a world keeping its path. Because gravity and time and the old agreements continue. Whether or not anybody claps, legacy did not arrive as a parade. It arrived as a notice taped inside a library door, naming new hours for sponsor stations. It arrived as a boy in a hallway, reminding another to mind his elbows without a teacher. It arrived as Lena texting "thank you" after a meet, and adding a single dot the way his mother does. The way Axe does, a small stamp that means "I am here." It arrived as a mother who slept without her shoulders at her ears and woke with a list of things that could wait until the afternoon. That night, he printed one quiet photograph from earlier days, the one Axe had taken with the flash off, only the vest and the patch, and Rosa's hand and the corner of a fingertip. He slid it into a clear sleeve and wrote a single line on a thin card in pencil, words stitched by hand. He dated the card with the month written out and added no time. Some things do not need their minute to stand. He set the sleeve beside the envelope, the segment case, the sponsor notices, and the ledger photo, and saw the row had become more than a shield. It was a record. He imagined a future desk where someone else would study the papers and learn a shape for courage that does not require shouting. Rosa placed a cup of tea by his arm. Steam rose like something alive, learning to be gentle. Axe sent a dot, and then a second dot. The twin punctuation of a man who waits to be sure a thing has landed. Marcus answered with a single word, "Saturn." Axe replied with a line that tasted like road and patience. "Rings are rules that work." Marcus laughed without sound and wheeled to the balcony. The air had sharpened. He met the focus ring with the respect a lock asks of a key. The planet held, the ring held. A woman called to a child down on the street. The child answered. The sound climbed a small ladder into night. He did not rehearse tomorrow. He stood his watch with a lens and the quiet knowledge that time and paper and small honest rituals can turn a single act into a structure other people can stand under when it rains. Morning folded into the apartment with ordinary sounds and a sky that promised no drama. Marcus woke to the faint breath of the radiator and the low patience of the fridge, the hush of someone else's pipes moving water through the spine of the building. The vest hung on the chair back, steady as furniture, the patch quiet and sure. He pressed one finger along the seam as if greeting a friend, and the leather answered by simply being there. Change showed itself the way winter light lengthens a room, not with spectacle but with small adjustments that stay. At school, the new reporting form existed as something you could actually fill and watch move. A timeline lived on the wall and on the site, not as a banner but as a working schedule with clear steps and real name. A slide in a classroom listed the after-hours line, and the staff who answered it. The principal did not speak over the slide. He stood beside it with a pen. And when a student asked where to go, when a coach made jokes that frosted the air, he answered in plain language that matched the words on paper. End of month brought an assembly that did not shake the walls. No lights, no anthem. The principal carried a single page and read it in the voice he used to take attendance. He said the school had failed by assuming mischief when the body before them had needed support, by letting river jokes breed in the stairwell, by teaching some students to lower their eyes. He said sorry in a sentence that ended with a period and a task list. Apology is a door that must be held while others pass through. He held it and stepped back. Teachers did not clap. Students did not cheer. Someone coughed. The room took the apology and placed it with the rest of the tools. In the library, the sponsor stations were ordinary now. The new clocks did their slow, round work. The laminated card with a string of numbers softened at the edges from use, the kind of wear that comes from hands rather than neglect. Miss Patterson printed notices that recorded only what mattered in the moment, times and initials, and the small act of a staff witness leaning close enough to see and far enough to leave room. She kept a folder for sponsor files in a drawer that used to squeak on the last inch. She oiled the runner and did not say the word legacy. The drawer learned to close in one long line. Robert came on his days and left on his days, and did not make his days into a performance. He kept the steadiness he had promised, and wore the small weariness that steadiness always costs. He met his daughter in the park by a fountain where stone holds water without complaint. He brought a book that had once lived on a kitchen table in another time. She did not take it the first day. The second day she touched the corner and stepped back. The third day she carried it with her and let him walk behind her without turning. Boundaries have a sound when they work. It is not the snap of a lock. It is the click of a latch finding its plate. At the shop, the ledger held its posture. Valkyrie counted sums with a pen that always returned to the same cup. The pages made the soft shingle sound of paper that has already accepted ink. Receipts were taped with straight edges. Names written so a stranger could read them without guesswork. Hours pressed in red by a thumb that did not hurry. On nights when the board showed bus passes delivered and a counselor's weekend shift covered and no camera ever panned, the small square in the corner took its kiss and closed the day. The woman in the blazer did not disappear. She arrived at the next public session with sleeves rolled in the way of someone who means to work. She asked where help was useful. Ms. Patterson pointed to the sponsor desk and to the shelf where paper eats itself if no one feeds it. The woman sorted forms with the concentration of a person who intends to hold her corner. She did not apologize into a microphone. She learned the names of 2 patrons and remembered them 2 weeks later. Cameras lost interest because there were no angles to catch. A columnist wrote that the story had turned out smaller than the headline and better for it. The line did not race across screen, because smaller and better does not hiss through wires the way conflict does. Marcus cut the paragraph out anyway, not for praise, but for the sentence that admitted a revision. He slid it into a sleeve and labeled the card with the month in neat letters. He did not add the day. Some records want a season rather than a minute. Lena became the kind of friend who kept lists and then threw them away when the day asked for a different order. She brought debate motions and tea bags and a pencil, chewed to a soft oval, and left with printouts that did not wobble under cross-examination. She learned that being right is quieter than sounding right. She learned to say, "I will check," and liked the flavor of that sentence. In the cafeteria, she held open a seat with a palm on a tray and did not make it look like charity. They argued about commas, as if commas could matter in the ways that count, because sometimes they do. On a morning that smelled of iron and paper dust, the board signed the line that made sponsor stations permanent across branches and named a budget and a larger expectation. The signatures sat in a row like modest soldiers. A staffer stamped the corner with fresh ink and did not pose for a picture. Rosa watched through a doorway and thought of hospital clipboards and consent forms and the way survival often looks like a pen scratching a steady line. She did not cry. She felt a loosening at the base of her neck that she had not noticed she was guarding. A tourist stopped by the block and asked where the parade had been on the motorcycle day. Rosa pointed him to the bakery because a person ought to leave a neighborhood with bread and not a story they misunderstood. The tourist left happier than he expected, a warm bag in his palm and a cup of coffee fogging his glasses. Marcus laughed after the door shut, and then sat quietly with the way laughter can sit beside ache without canceling it. A letter arrived from the property office, printed on paper that felt like something between cloth and cardboard. It named the rent relief that had turned rumor to structure, listed the account that had received it, and closed by thanking donors who did not demand their names be printed. At the bottom, the small square pressed its color with the hour written out in tiny words. Rosa framed the letter not for decoration but to keep the paper flat. Ink deserves care when it is asked to bear weight over time. A teacher asked Marcus to speak, and then asked again. After he had said no, he said no again, and the teacher listened the second time. Later, the teacher sent a thank you for refusing with grace. Because refusal is also instruction, the class watched a video about disability as policy rather than miracle, and wrote questions for themselves rather than for a guest. A page of those questions found its way to Marcus. He read them alone, and felt the kind of pride that moves through the body without leaving fingerprints. On an evening without sharp edges, Axe laid a strip of sandpaper on the kitchen table and worked the burrs off a small metal tag meant for a key ring. He passed it to Marcus without ceremony. The tag held a word pressed into it, the word already sewn in cloth. The letters sat plain and steady. Axe did not ask permission to put it on a chain. He let the boy choose where it would live. Marcus set it near the telescope base, as if naming a star by placing a marker close to the mount rather than in the sky. Rosa slept through a night without waking to recalculations. She woke late and made eggs that did not mean celebration, just eggs. The day moved over them and did not scrape. That afternoon, she wrote one sentence on a yellow pad in square script. We are held by small, honest work. She slid it under the sleeve that held the photograph of the vest and the fingertip, and did not tell anyone that she had done so. A week later, a boy in the hallway saw another boy shoulder past Marcus and set a palm on the backpack and said, "Not here. Not anymore." It did not explode. It settled. The boy with the backpack looked around, saw no audience for defiance, and shrugged the apology a teenager gives when he means to try to mean it later. Marcus lifted his chin once, not superior, not saintly, simply present in the small space where better had begun to grow. On a Sunday that tasted like rain and dust, they gathered in the annex for a quiet thing that did not call itself a ceremony. Ms. Patterson placed an empty sleeve and a card trimmed to fit. Valkyrie brought the ledger and did not open it. The principal set down the board letter with the care you use when you accept a tool from someone under a car. Rosa brought the rent envelope and the segment case, and the sponsor notices, and the small clipping. Axe brought his phone and did not take it out. Marcus brought the photograph of the vest and slid it in last. No one arranged the pieces into a triumphant row. They simply made room for the objects to live together. The table took the weight and said nothing, as light does when it settles on work already done. Later, alone, Marcus rolled the telescope onto the balcony and found a planet by instinct rather than chart. Not the bright bead he could do with closed eyes, not the ringed lantern that had taught him patience. A calmer world in a quieter part of the sky, a disk with tender shading that appears only if you keep breathing. He set the focus and let the glass and his eye and the air agree. The planet held. Night held back its noise. Below, someone laughed softly. The laugh you hear when two people have decided to be kind without inventing a reason. He did not make an oration to the stars. He laid his palm on the pad, feeling the seam where cloth meets cloth and becomes one thing. He thought of ledger squares and stamps, and the way a clock face can be a promise when a room agrees to honor it. He thought of a public apology, spoken without trumpets. A book returned to a woman who had every right to refuse. And the simple power of a rule that says, no elbows in crowded halls. The sky deepened until buildings became silhouettes. The telescope breathed fog and then cleared. As the glass learned the temperature of night, Marcus stood his small watch, thinking of all the hands that had learned to hold steady. He felt his life settle where it belonged, not on a screen, not as a symbol, but as a pattern of choices practiced until they drew a line you could follow in the dark. He rolled inside and hung the vest on its chair. The patch looked like a quiet line of text that knows it does not have to be loud. On the table, the sleeves lay stacked with modest pride. Rosa turned a page in a book without glancing at the clock. Axe sent no message, because sometimes the absence of a message is the truest kind of faith. Marcus opened the window and let the night move through the room. He spoke one line to the quiet, a line that fit the day and the table and the papers and the sky beyond the glass. Justice signs in cold ink. In the end, chain of custody reminds us that justice is not always loud. It is often a quiet act, written in steady line, sealed with patience and care. The story shows how ordinary people can stand against misunderstanding and prejudice, not by shouting louder, but by documenting truth, by staying calm when the world demands spectacle. Marcus's journey tells us that dignity is not something granted by others. It's something we claim through consistency, compassion, and courage. As Americans often say, the proof is in the pudding. Real character reveals itself not in moments of praise, but in how we act when no one is watching. In a society that too often rewards noise and overlooks nuance, the story reminds us to value process over performance, to face injustice, not with rage that burns out, but with discipline that endures, to speak when silence is no longer safety, to rebuild trust with paper, with time, and with small, honest work, and to remember that fairness and respect aren't abstract ideals, they are daily habits, practiced until they become culture. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever fought quietly for fairness, or helped someone without expecting applause, share your thoughts below. Tell us what justice and kindness mean in your world. Hit the like button if you believe small acts can change big systems, and subscribe to stay with us for more stories that move, challenge, and heal. May your nights be calm, your work steady, and your heart clear enough to see that even in chaos, there's a quiet kind of order waiting to be found.